All right. You guys have been asking for this one. I wasn't planning on going right back to extra history, and we still have some more of the series on Pearl Harbor to get to, and we will do that. But everybody's been asking me to do the Eggnog Riot, and this is something that I'm more than happy to do because it's part of Civil War history in that some of the people involved in this event go on to be prominent players in the story of the American Civil War. So we're going to dive into this one. I know a little bit about the Eggnog Riot. Most substantially, I know that Jefferson Davis was a cadet that was involved, that somehow his involvement got brushed under the rug and he wasn't expelled like a lot of other guys were. I know there's a future Supreme Court justice involved in this. There's future governors and a lot of guys who we've never heard of, probably because they were expelled, who might otherwise have gone on to have prominent roles in the military. So, as always, a link is in the description to the original content if you want to check it out without my commentary. Always recommend Extra History. They do a great job with everything they do.
U.S. Military Academy, West Point, New York, 1826. 'Twas the night before Christmas, about second watch, when cadets were preparing for a festive debauch. They stirred up some yolks, cream, and cinnamon roots, and produced hidden booze from footlockers and boots. They whipped at the mixture to thicken the nog, then tipped in 3 gallons of moonshine and grog. They toasted the season while keeping things quiet. And 11 toasts later, came the great Eggnog Riot.
So a little bit of background here. West Point's fairly new at this point. It's the U.S. Military Academy, West Point, New York. West Point is famously the place that was it's right on a bend in the Hudson River, which if you've ever been in upstate New York, the Hudson River is absolutely enormous. It's a super wide river, and it kind of divides New England from the rest of the United States at this time. And West Point was at this prominent bend in the river where it was a great place to put a fortification, and they put chains across the river to try and stop ships. And during the Revolutionary War, West Point was, late in the war, commanded by Benedict Arnold, who specifically requested this post because he had plans to turn it over to the British. And that is where his treason goes down, is his attempt to turn over West Point to the British. So now West Point has become the place that the U.S. puts their military academy during the administration of Thomas Jefferson to start training professional soldiers. And a lot of our most famous generals, even many of our most famous politicians, have been West Point graduates.
Thanks so much to Tab for a Cause for supporting great charities. Find out how you can help for free after the episode.
And I should mention, too, this is kind of a cool thing I learned when I visited West Point. I visited West Point, did a video on the cemetery there way back. It was one of my very first videos on this channel. But a lot of foreign soldiers go there, too. It's not just American soldiers. There are soldiers from many other nations that attend West Point.
Eggnog. A beloved holiday beverage. Creamy and sweet. Kind of like a knit sweater in drink form, you know? Essentially harmless. Unless you were drinking it in 19th century America, when it would get you totally trashed. Back then, eggnog incorporated all that was cheap and plentiful in the early American Republic. Eggs and milk from dairy farms, sugar from the Caribbean Triangle trade, and who could forget, huge amounts of alcohol. George Washington went hard with his own recipe, calling for a pint of brandy, a half pint of rum, a half pint of rye whiskey, and a quarter pint of sherry.
Dang.
Wow. But with this mixture, he led his guests in giving toast after toast after toast after toast, draining the glass each time.
And it's important to note that West Point students, I do believe, were allowed to drink. In fact, I think they got like rations of like whiskey and stuff. So it wasn't that they weren't allowed to drink. And remember, a lot of these guys are teenagers, right? I mean, George McClellan goes to, he's later, but goes to West Point at 16 years old. So a lot of these guys are 17, 18, 19 years old and, you know, probably away from home for the first time. That sets the stage for just like what you would see in a drunken frat party today.
Yeah, turned out getting blitzed at the holidays was kind of an American custom, which is why, in 1826, dozens of West Point cadets defied the orders of Superintendent Sylvanas Thayer and brewed up a batch of boozy eggnog on their own. Now, Thayer ran West Point on a strict disciplinary regime. Actually, he'd been brought in for that purpose, appointed in 1817 to reform the then failing institution. He introduced a regimented schedule, physical exercise, a new focus on engineering, a 4-year curriculum, and a series of demerits.
Yeah, and the engineering thing's important because when you graduated from West Point, the assignments were based on where you finished in your class. And finishing in your class is not just about grades, it's also about demerits. And, so a guy like Robert E. Lee finishes second in his class, never got demerits. Like, he might have had a couple if he got any at all. I can't remember, but he barely got demerits. So he's right at the top of his class. And the top people in the class got first dibs on engineers assignments, which those were the most coveted assignments in the Army, was to get that engineering assignment. And then, of course, there was infantry, cavalry, artillery.
Basically, anything you imagine when you hear the words West Point. And that also included a strict code of conduct, which forbid cadets from purchasing, possessing, and drinking alcohol. At first, Thayer made exceptions for holidays. Cadets could drink on the 4th of July and Christmas. But Independence Day 1825 had turned into a drunken embarrassment, with cadets performing a snake dance and carrying Major William Worth, the popular commandant of cadets, back to their barracks.
Oh, man.
An unacceptable loss of military bearing. So now, Thayer had banned alcohol totally. And for the Christmas of 1826, the eggnog would be served bone dry.
And it's understandable, right? You are raising the guys who are going to be leading the military. The U.S. is a brand new country. We've just had the War of 1812. If you're serious about having a disciplined army that can stand with the likes of the British or the Prussians and people like that, you've got to be able to have, that's got to start with the officers. And so instilling discipline is super important here.
Yet Thayer's still worried that someone, somewhere, was having a good time. That's why, at his personal Christmas party on December 23rd, 1826, Thayer pulls Major Worth aside into a quiet corner to discuss rumors he's heard that cadets are smuggling in alcohol. And he even has a chief suspect, Cadet Jefferson Davis. Yup, that Jefferson Davis. As in later president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis.
Not just later president of the Confederacy, later senator, later Secretary of War, and I need to look this up. I think he might have ended up being commandant at West Point at some point. Okay, I was confusing Robert E. Lee, who becomes superintendent of West Point. Superintendent and commandant are two different roles. Becomes superintendent of West Point in 1852. But yeah, Jefferson Davis was Secretary of War, a senator, and then president of the Confederacy.
Turns out Davis is the worst drunk at the school, notorious for sneaking out to taverns. In fact, he'd just gotten out of the hospital after an incident where he'd been stumbling back in the dark and fallen down a 60-foot ravine. Needless to say, Davis was a bad influence. A rebel. Though not like that teacher's pet Robert E. Lee, of course, who showed up at Thayer's office at 7 a.m. that morning to discuss trigonometry homework. Regardless, Thayer
totally who Robert E. Lee was, right? He was the student who was above all that stuff, and no way he was getting involved in any of it. And it's interesting to think of Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis being at West Point at the same time, and they were.
Ellsworth that instructors staying in the barracks, Captain Hitchcock and Lieutenant Thornton, should definitely keep on the lookout. And boy, was he right to be concerned. For even as Thayer spoke, a batch of contraband eggnog was already brewing in the North Barracks. For weeks, cadets had been felching ingredients and food from the mess hall. And sure enough, Jefferson Davis was one of the instigators.
All I can think of is like the scene in Band of Brothers where you have Captain Sobel saying, "What is this?" And he's holding a can of peaches. And he's like, "This is United States Army property, and I will not tolerate theft from my mess hall." These guys have been thieving from the mess hall for weeks to put all this together. Love it.
The most intrepid of which had ventured out to barter for alcohol at nearby taverns, but finding the prices too expensive for the sheer quantity they needed. 4 cadets had crossed the Hudson River, where prices were cheaper. They finally settled on 2 gallons of cheap, barely aged moonshine whiskey. But they ran into trouble on the way back, when they found a U.S. Army private guarding the West Point dock. So, whispering amongst themselves, they made a plan, scrapping together all of the money they had left for a bribe. 35 cents, which worked. Man, Zoe, corruption used to be so affordable.
Corruption used to be so affordable. Like, this has got all the, like, everything you want in a story, right? Now we're talking, like, prohibition here, right? Smuggling alcohol across the Hudson River at night, paying a bribe to the soldier to get it passed and get it into the academy.
Frickin' inflation. So back at the barracks, they poured the whiskey into the mix, along with a gallon of rum from another cadet. This was their act of resistance, a statement proving that Thayer couldn't take away their boozy, deeply unhealthy traditions.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yes. Tomorrow they would toast and get toasted. Christmas Eve, the North Barracks, 11:59 p.m. All is quiet when Captain Hitchcock makes his final night patrol. Seems like Thayer's worries were unfounded. Whatever's happening, at least it's staying quiet. He and Thornton go to bed. But in room 28, the holiday nog bar is open, baby! Cadets are stealthing in to get their drink, then spilling into the nearby room to toast. But the party has been going on for hours, and the mix is getting a little thin. That is until a Christmas miracle, when a cadet returns from a midnight run with another gallon of whiskey. Hey, wait, did I say miracle? I meant catastrophe, because this is where things start to go downhill. At 4 a.m. Christmas morning, Hitchcock awakes to such a clatter that he sprang from his bed to see what was the matter, which was, of course, 2 floors above him, a ton of singing, stomping, and shouting. Just full-on revelry.
So it's all good that you're smuggling the alcohol and you're having the party, but the problem comes when you get trashed and you have no control over what you're doing anymore, and now you make enough noise that you start waking up the people involved, and it's only going to go from bad to worse.
He crashes the party and finds 6 cadets in a single room, and he's halfway through ordering them all back to their beds when he hears another commotion next door. And what Hitchcock finds in that room is both pathetic and hilarious. 3 cadets completely blitzed. 2 cower under a blanket, while another tries to, and I kid you not, hide his identity by putting a hat over his face, which works exactly as well as you'd expect it would. Hitchcock berates them, ordering them back to their rooms. But the mood among the cadets starts to turn here a little. Yeah. They're not cowed, they're angry.
Everybody's different when they're drunk, right? We all know the people when they get drunk, they love everybody. I love you, and some people get emotional and they're crying and weepy, and other people become angry drunks, right? So these are apparently angry drunks.
I mean, how dare he try to stop their deep-seated and wholesome tradition of celebrating the Messiah's birth by getting utterly annihilated on cream drinks laced with cheap rot gut, huh? And just as things start heating up, Hitchcock hears another roar downstairs and heads for the stairwell. Upon his exit, a cadet then makes a drunken decree. Get your dirks and bayonets and pistols if you got them. Before the night's over, Hitchcock will be dead.
So here's the other problem. You've got a bunch of young men. These are military guys, so probably high on testosterone, a lot of strength, a lot of brashness there anyway, and there's weapons around.
Meanwhile, on the ground floor, Hitchcock bursts into room 5, and it's crammed with cadets, more than the upstairs party. They all go still and turn to him. Then, with just the most impeccable timing, the opposite door slams open, and Jefferson Davis staggers in completely shit-faced and shouts, "You should put away the grog, boys! Captain Hitchcock is coming!" He then presumably adds a, "Oh." Hitchcock.
Keep in mind in all of this, Jefferson Davis is the one guy we know is involved who gets off completely scot-free in this whole mess.
Reads the cadets the riot act, legally informing them they must disperse. He then specifically orders Davis to go back to his room and stay there. Davis does, and passes out in bed, thereby missing the rest of the festivities as the building descends into chaos.
There you go.
Dozens of drunk, belligerent cadets seize weapons. Then, when Hitchcock comes across a locked room, he kicks down the door, only to find himself looking down the barrel of a pistol. The powder jets in his face, but another cadet has slammed into the first cadet holding the gun, knocking off his aim. The bullet then explodes in the doorframe next to Hitchcock's head. Lieutenant Thornton, now awake, was doing no better. He tried to gain control of one group, only to be menaced with a sword, and then when he turned down a stairwell, another cadet knocked him out cold with a piece of wood. Hitchcock ran to a cadet on guard duty and told him to get the commandant, Major Worth. He was popular with the cadets and they might listen to him. Only here's where things get really twisted, because some of the rioting cadets misheard what Hitchcock said and thought that he'd called for regular artillery soldiers that were stationed at West Point. The generally upper-class cadets hated those lowly rank-and-file soldiers. And now what, Hitchcock wanted them to come and shell the barracks or something? Just no, absolutely not. No. The sloshed youths broke out their weapons in full and started fortifying the building. They besieged Hitchcock in his room, throwing stones and pieces of wood at his windows. And they broke everything. They tore banisters off the stairs, shattered windows, and smashed all of the cookery.
Yeah, there's actually documents out there that show like how much damage was done, like in the thousands and thousands of dollars, which in the 1820s, is, I don't know what the equivalent would be to that. Probably at least $100,000 in damage today. And again, these aren't just anybody. These are military cadets, and so there's going to be military discipline involved.
By the time Major Worth arrived just before 6 a.m., the eggnog was beginning to wear off. And when he called for morning formation, the mutineers actually staggered out, sheepish and ill, making a ragged line under the cruel Christmas dawn. 90 cadets, 1/3 of the student body, took part in the Eggnog Riot. But since expelling a third of the school would have been a major embarrassment, they decided to only court-martial the 20 worst offenders. Since he'd gone to bed, Jefferson Davis escaped charges and was instead confined to barracks for 6 weeks, meaning that despite helping instigate the party, he largely dodged consequences. Yep. And Robert E. Lee.
And there's something to be said for the fact that he realized when it was going too far. And again, this sometimes is just a matter of how well some people can hold their liquor compared to others.
Who had not participated, testified on behalf of the accused cadets, using his reputation as an honorable gentleman to launder his comrades' actions. This would, to put it lightly, become a reoccurring theme in both of their lives. Ultimately, 9 cadets were permanently expelled. Their careers ruined so badly that 2 of them later became Confederate generals and 1 the Texas Secretary of State.
Let's talk about these guys here,
because that 2 of them later
Hugh Mercer, in particular, he is the grandson of Hugh Mercer, the general during the Revolutionary War. Born in Scotland, settles in Virginia, becomes a good friend of George Washington, is killed he's bayoneted, brought off his horse at the Battle of Princeton a week after the Battle of Trenton, and killed. And he's the grandfather of this guy. He's also Hugh Mercer, the older one, is a great-great-great-grandfather of General George Patton. And then this Hugh Mercer, I believe, is like a great-grandfather of Johnny Mercer, who was a famous celebrity of the 20th century. So, some of these guys still went on to have great careers, but most, if you look at the list of the guys who were expelled, most of them you've never heard of. And there were some that President John Quincy Adams actually pardons or reduces the sentence, but in many cases he approved them. But some of those guys might have gone on to have great military careers, and we've just never heard of them.
Became Confederate generals and 1 the Texas Secretary of State. Though another disgraced candidate spent most of his life entangled with the legal system, eventually serving 8 years as a justice on the Supreme Court. Oh man, Zoe, for a second I was worried someone was going to learn something and there was going to be accountability, but thank you so much for keeping the status quo. USA! Hold on. This is strong. Actually though, perhaps one thing was learned. Because these days, things happen a little bit different at West Point, as they send their cadets home for the holidays.
There you go.
If they happen to, say, get drunk and smash all the dishes, you know what? At least it's at their own family's house. Wow, Rob, that was a phenomenal story. Thank you for penning the script. David, thank you so much for illustrating this episode. Also, thank you so much to Mac, our audio editor, and the boys over at Devon House Creative who put together the edit. And you know what? Actually, this brings me to a larger point. I've been drinking eggnog the entire time I've been reading the script, and it has gotten me a little emotional. It is the holidays after all, and I'm the showrunner, and I can do what I want. So, I would like to propose a toast. I would like to cheers to everyone who works with us at Extra Credits. You are all wonderful beings, and these shows are ultimately amazing because of you all. I would also like to thank all of the viewers who have been watching with us either this year or over the years. Your support and...
All right, so I've got McDonald's sweet tea here, so cheers. And thank you, Extra History, for a fantastic year of great content, helping us learn history. And for every so often showing up in the comment section of these videos, and just participating in that way and showing your support. So we appreciate all that you guys do, and I personally appreciate everybody. Gonna have a bunch of end of the year stuff coming, guys. Some top 10 lists, things like that, like I did last year. So be watching for those, and check and make sure you're still subscribed, because I've had people telling me that they've been unsubscribed from the channel. That's not unique to this channel. I've had other YouTubers tell me the same thing. So just double check, make sure your notifications are on, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.